Welcome back to another edition of the Disney Dish Podcast with Jim Hill. It's me, Len Testa, and this is our show for the week of Schmurz Day, July 29th, 2024. On the show today, we recap a tough week for Universal and Disney theme parks. In listener questions, what's up with Rogers the Musical? And are we going to get an attraction based on Inside Out 2? Then in our main segment, we celebrate the opening of Rock and Roller Coaster 25 years ago today, with special guest Imagineer Jim Shull, who designed the ride, and my twin sister Linda, who got us a hotel room next to Steven Tyler himself for the opening event. Let's get started by bringing in the man who's made a lot of mistakes in life, but adding more cheese to a recipe is not one of them. It's Mr. Jim Hill. Jim, how's it going?
It's going well, Len. But interesting you mentioned cheese, because I'm trying to chase down a thank you gift for a friend of myself and Nancy, a lovely woman called Diane Gennard. She recently arranged for us to go up to Boothbay Harbor, where we took a puffin cruise, which tells you a lot about myself and Nancy, and that was a bucket list item. Other people want to go to the top of Everest. No, I want to see puffins. So,
Pepperidge Farm remembers, Jim. I think that's the line I would go with, yeah.
There we go. But here's the thing. Diane doesn't like flowers. She doesn't like chocolate. She does, however, love Prairie Breeze cheddar, which is this white cheddar from the Milton Creamery in Milton, Iowa. It's, again, a white cheddar that ages for 9 months. And, Len, I do not have a sophisticated palate. I have actually been known to eat Kraft singles with the plastic still on them. Like, whereas Diane, all she wants is this block of Prairie Breeze cheddar, and
she's using phrases like piquant and stuff like that. And you're like, you're chewing on the wrapper, going, I don't know, this tastes good to me.
and the other thing that kind of is crazy about this, anyone who's actually been down breeze of a prairie dog colony knows that the Prairie Breeze, that's not a good name. But that said,
it's more metaphor, it's more imagery, it's more marketing.
There we go. So. There we go. But I cannot find a block of Prairie Breeze cheddar for the life of me. Tried Whole Foods, tried specialty markets like Idlewild Farm and Lowell Farm. I have been told at this point I am more likely to encounter Bigfoot or the Loch Ness Monster than I am to find this cheese. But the search goes on.
Okay, it's Iowa?
It's made by the Milton Creamery in Milton, Iowa, but evidently...
Okay. I'm actually going to Iowa later this summer. It's one of the 3 states I've never been to.
Oh!
I can swing by if you need it.
Okay, all right. We get back to me. I'm hopeful, but again, you may be my last resort. So
I have a feeling that our listeners are going to start sending in orders, and I'm going to start getting Venmo.
There we go.
Money for.
There we go.
All right. Also with us on the show today is Imagineer Jim Shull, former executive creative director with Walt Disney Imagineering, whose nearly 30-year career, including designs of theme park favorites from the Cool Ship in Tomorrowland to Toy Story Land to Rock and Roller Coaster itself. Welcome, Jim.
Well, welcome, and good to be back. Let me see. I'm finding right now I could buy Prairie Breeze cheddar cheese on Amazon. It's only $27.20. I'll send it over to your house, Jim.
Oh.
There you go. You know what? Amazon solves all problems.
Okay.
They sell everything.
Okay.
I love Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
Also on the call is my twin sister Linda, who organized our birthday trip week in 1999 that got us next to Aerosmith during the opening of Rock and Roller Coaster. Welcome, Linda, and happy birthday, by the way.
Thank you. You as well.
What's it like to be that old? So the inside joke here is Linda's older than I am by 7 minutes. So every year, she was born at 4:19 in the morning. I will call her at 4:19 in the morning and say, happy birthday. What's it like to be that old? And her response is invariably, you'll see. And then she calls me back 7 minutes later. So anyway.
Okay.
All right. Let's do a quick shout out to our subscribers. Thanks to everyone who subscribes to the show over at patreon.com/Jim Hill Media, including Cameron King. Hey, Cameron. Aaron Dickert, Ryan Harkar, Lynn Sarabin, Bradley Rediger, and Ray Kloss. Jim, and Linda, these are the Disney Cruise Line Imagineers furiously working on water slide concepts for the Disney Adventure and the unnamed 8th ship. Their current ideas include Goofy's Kooky Canteen, with water jets shooting you through the Cabanas Buffet at 20 miles an hour, and Donald's Duck Dodge, where you steer a raft while trying to avoid other guests spraying you with water cannons. True story.
Okay.
Both of those sound like they work for me.
Yep.
Duck Dodge, isn't that dodgeball movie reference. Dive, duck, dodge, dip.
Oh, is that a Bugs Bunny Daffy Duck?
There we go. Duck Dodgers in the 23rd and a
yeah.
half century. Yes. Again, I have no
This
math,
is why
no
I don't know
science,
calculus,
but that
because
I
I can
front of mind.
yeah, exactly. We don't know real things. We know this.
There we go.
All right, on to the news, folks. The news is sponsored by touringplanes.com. Touring Planes helps you save time and money at theme parks like Walt Disney World. Check us out at touringplanes.com. All right, first bit of news. Disneyland announced the retheming of Frontierland's Hungry Bear restaurant to Hungry Bear Barbecue Jamboree, and then, curiously, installed a Big Al statue near the Grizzly River Run and posted to Twitter a Country Bear hoedown image with the D23 #/Horizons. Sorry, #Horizons, which is the D23 sort of theme for the year. And that led to this question, Jim and Jim, from our friend Andrew. Might Disneyland revisit the Country Bear franchise? The most logical idea is a retheme of Grizzly River Run to resurrect the Country Bear 500 idea. What do you guys think?
Well, there is some artwork out that during the reimagining of DCA 2.0, they did plan to do the introduction of animals and critters into Grizzly River Rapids. And among those critters were bears. So maybe what they're going to do is revisit that idea and see if it flies or swims or wades.
Or crawls, hibernates.
On the other hand, the Country Bear 500, I have seen artwork for this, but Jim, I always wondered, was that fan-produced art or was that art that was done in-house? The notion of doing some sort of car-based adventure in the woods just behind Country Bear Playhouse in California.
I can't speak to that because, again, as we've talked before on Disney Dish and Disney Unpacked, there are so many ideas that surface and bubble around the hallways of 1401 in Glendale. So that very well may have been a real idea that for a moment had some life. But what I'm talking about are actually models that were done for Grizzly River Rapids that were released by Disney Company with new scenes, such as the one just before the big drop, where there was a bear hanging from some ropes and a broken down bridge that you'd pass underneath a little bear butt as you went down the big old slip and slide. So they were serious to the point of putting money into the ride, into the model, and then touting that out before the public.
I mean, they would if they did Country Bear River Run, they have the soundtrack, they have the characters. I mean,
you would think that's a no-brainer, but
it kind of fits in with their middle years theme. Like, there's short-term stuff that we're going to do these things in the next 2 years, but it sort of fits in with their theme of Walt Disney World of like, we need to redo an existing attraction because it's faster than building something new, and it would give people another reason to come to the park.
This is true. And they do have the facility there in Anaheim where the ride system in the mountain already exists. So putting new scenes into that is not much of a heavy lift.
Yeah. I mean, there's always a chance that, they're overhyping a D23 panel like 40 years of costuming, which is an actual thing, or, whatever, but we'll see.
Yeah, well, I choose to remain optimistic.
Okay.
Me too. All right. Also, last week, Universal Orlando's parent company, Comcast, had its quarterly earnings call, and it was not great. So revenue was down as compared to last year, same quarter last year, which they attributed to the following things. They said 2/3 of the revenue drop was due to lower attendance at its domestic theme parks, probably because of the opening of Super Nintendo World and Universal Studios Hollywood the previous year, which Jim and Jim, we all went to. A post-COVID pull of visits into 2022 and 23, with some of those visits would have otherwise occurred in 2024. Cruises as an alternative, I think it was really interesting that they mentioned that. Strong dollar making international visits more expensive, so we get less of them. And then folks waiting until 2025 for Epic Universe to open. So the president of Comcast, Mike Cavanaugh, said these trends will continue until Epic opens. And I don't know if you guys see the show notes, but I wrote that in capital letters.
Yeah.
They also said, Mike Cavanaugh also said, theme park revenue is impacted by the fact that they haven't opened a major new attraction in Orlando since Velocicoaster in 2021. And I know we say on this show all the time
Mm-hmm.
that new rides drive theme park attendance. It's the fundamental truth
Mm-hmm.
of theme park operations. And here is the president of Comcast saying the exact same thing. So let me pause it before we talk about, rumors that care or innuendo that came out of this. What do you guys think of this? I'll start with you, Jim Hill.
Well, the weird part of it is if you look cold-bloodedly at what they did at Universal Studios Florida this year, I mean, changed out the Kid Zone into DreamWorks Land. They launched a new nighttime show. They have a new daytime parade. I mean, there was some money and effort put into the park to give people a reason to visit during the summer of 2024. Not to mention that whole nostalgia thing they're doing about rides that have closed at the park, Jaws and Back to the Future and that sort of thing. So,
Yeah.
I mean, there was an effort made. It just perhaps just wasn't all that tempting an offer. Though, remember, this is them largely talking about second quarter earnings. We will see how that stuff impacts the third quarter when they do that call in late summer, early fall.
Yeah, I mean, they've already said that nothing's going to get better until Epic opens.
Okay.
They literally said that on the call. So.
Okay.
Jim Shull, what do you think?
But there is precedent for this, Len, because originally, remember, not too long ago, Universal made the statement they're going to open something major every single year. And we had a number of attractions that opened every single year. But that kind of got put on pause while the company took their resources and applied them to Epic Universe.
They actually said on the call that had the pandemic not occurred, Epic would have opened in 2022. So they had the right cadence, just pandemic. Fair.
Yep.
Okay, go ahead.
No, it's that pesky germ got in the way, yeah.
Exactly.
But one of the other notes I'll make is there's precedent for this because I know when Disney opened their fourth theme park in Florida,
Yep. I was
Animal
going
Kingdom,
there, yeah.
they had the same issue. They had the same attitude because, you want to be very careful when you pull the marketing trigger to tell people, hey, just around the corner next year or the year after, there's going to be a new reason to come to Disney World. Well, now Universal has the same issue because they're telling people next year there's going to be a new theme park. So if you're sitting in, the Midwest or the Northeast or even Europe planning a trip, wouldn't you just say, I'll wait until 25 rather than coming now?
Okay, so that's a great point, and I want to expand on that. Linda, you've successfully raised at least one child, right?
For the most part, yes.
Linda has two daughters, so and God, I hope they're
least
listening
one.
when I said that.
Yeah.
At least one.
At least one.
Exactly. All right.
least one.
So I want your opinion on this. Well, let me set it up for you. So in speaking with financial analysts after that call and with folks in the Universal Orlando fan community that I think we would all consider experts, what I heard was, things that I would classify as rumors right now, but still concerning, and things like this. So my understanding is that Universal was hoping to open Epic in the first 3-ish months of 2025. And then, in the last 60 days, that slipped to, quote, summer of 2025. Now I'm hearing these things. Number one, we actually don't have a solid opening day yet. Number two, at least one major land will not be completed until the fall of 2025. So 3, Universal's considering a phased opening of Epic Universe, where they open most, but not all of the park, to paying guests. Now, as you can imagine, there are probably risks involved, right? So here's what I'm thinking, and Linda, this is my setup for you. They pretty much have to have a solid opening month for advertising to give to consumers no later than Thanksgiving of this year, because families start talking about vacation ideas for 2025 when they get together for the holidays. And that has to be a part of the conversation. Because if you get everybody excited for something else, like a cruise or Alaska or whatever, and you start researching and budgeting that train has left the station, it's hard to switch. So Linda, what do you think there? When do we normally start talking about family trips?
So we would start planning, but having done this, right, when they opened Hollywood Studios, right, MGM Studios back in the day, and there were not as many attractions, I think once you do that one time, you say, I'm not investing, especially as expensive as it is to travel. I'm not going to invest that much money for something that's part way, unless, Universal decides to charge me for part of a ticket, which is unlikely.
Linda is the optimist in our family, by the way.
Yeah.
Folks. She's the one.
There we
she's
go.
the one whose spirit has not been crushed
but
by this industry.
I would sort of liken it to, Hollywood studios pre-Star Wars, when the dry years, right? When you could get Hollywood studios done in like 3 hours. For the most part, right?
Linda's also the direct one in the family, the one who doesn't mince words.
That's right. But where you're like, it's fun, and the things that were there were good. So
you're never getting into a Disney theme park again. But you know what? You had a good run.
It's no. I think some of it's going to depend on what rides they open. So I'm not going to go for a parade. But I would go back to Disney for some of their classic rides. I'd go back for Delta Dream Flight. I'd go back for Horizons. But you're not going to draw me in with a parade and a stage show.
Somewhere, Jim, there are people trying to fashion a noose out of an electrical cord right now in Celebration, Florida. And I'm begging you, stop and reconsider the other good things in your life. So, Linda, I don't know if you know this, but that's literally Disney's plan for next year. Parades. Yes.
If only there were a podcast that would tell me these things that I could listen to.
Oh God. I think I have the vapors. Okay. All right. So the thing I'm getting here is that, and Jim Shull, I want to hear whether you agree with this or not. It's going to be exceptionally challenging to convince people to pay full price for a park that isn't completely open. And I think, Jim Shull, just to remind you, remember, they were planning to prioritize admission to Epic Universe by how much you were spending on hotels and tickets. How much more does this make that a challenge?
Wow, this is such an interesting topic because we're going down memory lane. When the Disney MGM studio opened in Florida several decades ago, you could go to the Indiana Jones stunt show, but it didn't open. It was in technical rehearsals, literally the 3-act show. At the end of the second act, instead of going down to Descender, Indy and Marion, the director would step onto the stage and yell, "Cut!" And they would reset because the show wasn't done. But hey, they needed the capacity, so they danced around it. So the question is now, would Universal take that same cue? Now, one thing about Universal's Epic Universe is that the way the park is set up, because there are land portals to each of the 4 lands. So do you just roll the rolling hedges out in front of the portal of the one land that's not quite ready to open and then price accordingly? Or do you limit the number of tickets that you sell to Epic Universe? Or, as they've already announced, or at least rumored to announce, the only way you can buy a single day ticket to Universal, Epic Universe, is, well, you've actually got to buy a multi-day ticket to all of Universal Resort. So they do have cards to play here.
Yeah, I'm not sure that discounted tickets for their brand new theme park is a road they want to go down, because Disney is famously not discounting their park tickets. So that's going to be, and you're right, Jim. They have some cards to play, but my concern is they don't know what cards families are holding, and a lot of families are just going to look at all of this and say, to Linda's point, we're just going to, we'll go in 2026 when everything is running. The problem with that, beyond Universal, is the entire rest of Central Florida is counting on the attendance boost from Epic opening in 2025, and people coming to do that. Right?
You're right.
We are anxiously awaiting that rising tide that will lift our boats. Right?
Oh wow.
And also, I'll interject. There's also a domino effect that we don't really think about, and that is, there's a lot that Disney has been rumored to announce, but they're not going to pull the trigger, because when they pull the trigger, it's in response to somebody else. Like Epic Universe is a hit, they need to respond. But if Epic Universe is delayed, their response can be delayed or even changed.
Right, yeah. They can spend less if it's not that big of a threat.
Well, or simply delay. You delay your expenditure into the next capital year.
Sure. So yeah, there's a lot to be concerned about there. Hopefully they get everything back on track. One strategy, and Jim Shull, I'm sure you're familiar with this, is how fast and how much money can we throw at this problem, right? and I can hear the project managers that listen to our show screaming in unison the famous quote that it takes 9 months to birth a child, no matter how many women you assign the task. Right? There's only so much you can do, but what can you do? Right? Yeah.
Well, it depends on, again, why, if this rumor is true, why would Epic Universe be delayed? Is it something in the facility? Is it something in the ride system? Is it something in the media that has to go into the ride system? You know, it depends on what is the critical path. And that's where there are smarter minds than mine sitting around a table saying, well, what's the problem? How can we address it? And what can we do?
I mean, there's smart people over there. I'm sure they've got a number of options.
There are a lot of smart people who came from Disney who are over there.
There we are. Also
so I'm not pushing the panic button yet because it's just August of, it's practically August, but we've got plenty of time. But by the same token, we don't really have any time at all. So a lot of things got to go right between now and then. I'm hopeful. So hopefully they can get it done.
Yeah. Okay. Well, there's probably a planning scheduler over in Universal Comcast right now who's getting a large family-sized bottle of Malanta and Tums delivered to them daily.
But this IV isn't saline. It's nitro cold brew from Starbucks. Whatever. You know what? Like, it's part of our new healthcare plan. Just inject this right now. All right. Also, on July 24th last week, Disney World launched the latest version of its Lightning Lane ride reservation system, Lightning Lane Multipass. And Jim, with all respect to Her Majesty Britney Spears and the Bee Army, I think it's safe to say that Brit's 55-hour Las Vegas marriage to Jason Alexander went better than that. I'm not even sure. Honest to God, I was watching this happen in real time yesterday, and I told my team flat out, I don't know if these are issues or problems because I can't get the app to work enough to say this is clearly a decision that somebody would rationally make, or this is a bug. Like, I literally can't explain what we're seeing, so I don't know if is this a programming bug? Is it a data problem? Is this the way things are supposed to work? Let me give you some examples. Yesterday, and Linda, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this from a planning a family trip perspective. Some Lightning Lane multipass attractions were completely sold out for the next week or more on day one of this thing launching. Some individual Lightning Lane attractions, like Seven Dwarfs Mine Train, were immediately sold out 6 days in advance. I mean, it's possible that the number of seats allocated per hour for Lightning Lane didn't change with this release, and they underestimated demands. I mean, that'd be something that the industrial engineers had to make some kind of assumption on for the purposes of modeling. Linda, you used to work with industrial engineers. An assumption of, every day's future demand is going to be the same as the typical current day's demand. That's a reasonable assumption, right? But it could have been wrong, right? It could have been discounting the possibility that more people will use Genie Plus once they know they can book X days in advance with a specific return time, because that would increase demand, right? It's also possible that whatever amount of ride capacity was allocated to offsite, because they hold back a little bit of offsite ride capacity. They hold back a little bit of ride capacity for same day availability. It's possible that's just too high relative to future demand, right?
Okay.
But Linda, I want to get your thoughts on this.
So as a planner, as a type A planner.
As a planner, exactly. Yeah.
Right? I like the idea of being able to pre-schedule. The stress that is starting to come with planning out my Disney vacation, even with touring plans and Lightning Lanes and Genie and everything, feels like a lot, right? So I can see where that would be overwhelming for folks.
Yeah.
But yes, I would be trying to figure out how to make sure I see the things I want to see with my family. So I would jump through the hoops and pay the money, and
sure,
I would do all the work.
There were a couple of interesting things in using the app yesterday that we found. So one of the things we had heard ahead of time was you would be able in the future to have overlapping ride reservations. So like you could schedule, for example, a Big Thunder Mountain Railroad return time from 11 a.m. to noon, and a Tiana's Bayou Adventure from like 11:45 to 12:45. Which would allow you to use more of them in a day. So theoretically a good thing, right? If the two attractions are close together, like that would make sense, right? Okay. Yesterday, it was possible to have 3 Lightning Lanes at Epcot, for example, at Remy, at Mission Space, and Living with the Land, for the exact same 1 hour return window. Like
Oh,
all 3 of them between 10 a.m. and 11 a.m.
okay.
And number one, it's not physically possible to do that in an hour.
No.
Right?
No.
Okay. And I know that there's a grace period in the where, they'll let you show up late and everything. And that seems to be 60 minutes. So sure, if you knew that, it's fine.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're an average guest and you can do that, do you know what you're getting into by doing that? Like we're all nerds, right? And everybody listening to this show is a nerd, right?
Mm-hmm.
But think of your neighbor that hasn't been in 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
Would they know that 3 overlapping attractions in Epcot in 3 different corners of the park is probably not a great idea?
Especially in July. I mean,
Yeah, a good thing is the guests will pass out by the time,
yeah, that's exactly.
before they get to guest experience,
Yeah.
Let me interject and share a very short story. I had my sister and brother-in-law took their 2 daughters and they stayed at the Boardwalk Hotel right there because they wanted to go to Epcot. And they walked into Epcot. Their family was separated. My sister-in-law went back to the hotel room with one of the daughters, and my brother-in-law and one of the other daughters walked around and had a great time in World Showcase. We called them that night and said, "How'd you like Epcot? How'd you like Future World?" "What Future World?" "We walked around the lake in World Showcase." "You mean there's more to the park?" So I illustrate that by, these are not stupid people, but
No.
even with that big ball, aluminum colored ball right across the water, it didn't connect that, that's part of the park also.
Oh, wow.
And not for nothing, but I think they have a Disney professional in the family
Yeah.
that they could have asked questions to, like
Yeah.
Linda has a couple, right?
Okay.
There's if you want to know, you could ask, but but the thing is, if you don't know what you don't know, you can't ask, right?
Oh, boy.
I cannot imagine. By the way, we're on day 2 of this, and honest to God,
Mm-hmm.
we're 48 hours into this release, and I'm being serious here. I do not know what the rules are, and I don't know what the capacity is. It's just still a little too wonky. So I can't imagine what the guest experience team is going through today in the parks. But God bless them.
Just want to remind people, you can find those folks standing under the blue umbrellas, and I bet there are a lot of blue umbrellas in the parks right now. So
I actually want to go to a bar in Kissimmee and just hear the conversations like, "You weren't there, man. You weren't there." Like it's
see, this is why we still need the big bamboo. There used to be that wonderful cast member
the
owned
bar. Yeah.
Big Bamboo, yeah. Except if you walked in as an Imagineer, they would take your name tag off of you before they'd accept your order.
Well,
But the good news is, ignoring the fact that the back of the restaurant, the one that's an open deck over the bayou, was falling into the bayou, and the alligators, well, they didn't eat much. So,
Exactly.
if you
They're
could,
well-fed.
yeah, they were well fed. If you could forgive those things, it was a great place.
It almost feels like Disney, the My Disney Experience app should have a feature that says, you just booked 2 overlapping rides. Are you sure you want to do this? Like, you already have this in your cart, or are you a marathon runner? If no, right, we're not going to approve it, because there's no way. And then I think you'd be stressed if you missed it.
Yeah, there is a warning, and to their credit, it's a prominent warning if you try and overlap with a meal. A scheduled meal. But I think there are ways that you can go through the app modifying reservations where either that warning isn't prominent, or you just sort of get like alert fatigue. Like, yeah, I get it, and you just kind of scroll through things.
So Len and Linda, a question for you both. If you're in line and you're doing everything according to their program, but Ratatouille, which is a ride you're on, goes down. So now you're at Ratatouille. Is there a way to automatically push out the next reservation you have?
That's a great question. I know that in the system prior to last week, there, if the delay was beyond a certain number of minutes, like if the ride was down for X minutes, let's say it's 15, that Lightning Lane would convert into a Good Anywhere multi-pass. Or a good anywhere pass, where you could go use it on something else. But I don't know what the current policy is. I'll check and I'll let you know.
Well, maybe Disney should be printing lots and lots of those. Just have them
Paper
as a
fast
roll
passes.
of tickets just to hand them out.
Yeah.
Yeah, here's an idea. You show up at a ride, they hand you a paper ticket. It has a return time on it. You come back then. I don't know. Call me crazy.
Think
All
about
right,
that
on to
one.
listen.
Never work. Never
We got
work.
stuck on Peter Pan. Remember, Len?
We got evacuated. Yeah, that's the only ride I've ever been evacuated from. I was with Katie, your daughter.
Yeah, we were on Peter Pan and got stuck and had to jump on Wendy's bed, and they handed us a paper ticket. That seemed to work pretty well after an
I was
hour.
fine with that. All right, on to listener emails. Renee asks for Jim and Jim. I'm really surprised that Rogers the Musical at Disney California Adventure didn't have a longer run or reopen at some point. As far as I know, the theater isn't being used to this day since the show ended last August. I never got to see it in person. Hope it comes back again somewhere at some point. What's next for DCA's Hyperion Theater? So, Jim Hill.
Okay, a couple of things here. One is that, in fact, I think we were discussing this on last week's show about there being fewer character greetings and that sort of thing in Florida because during the pandemic, a number of folks who literally they made their living. They were theme park professionals. They worked in entertainment. They worked in character. They left the business when, for example, the parks in Florida were closed for months, and then the parks in Anaheim were closed for the better part of a year. The other thing, to be honest, and this keys into Rogers the Musical, is you have to remember that last year Marvel Studios did not have a great year. Ant-Man Quantumania underperformed, the Marvels underperformed, and Kevin Feige literally made the decision to, rather than having 3 and 4 Marvel related things come out, that the next year they hit a reset and they did one. Now, mind you, Deadpool and Wolverine, we're recording this on Schmerz Day before the day before the film actually comes out. But it's already supposed to be the hit film of the summer. And so the notion is that one of the reasons we didn't see Rogers the Musical extend because there's a new take on what the MCU is going to be, and it starts with Wolverine or Deadpool and Wolverine, and will continue then with Captain America, Brave New World come February or thereabouts. But
a Deadpool character would fit in really well with sort of the tradition of Hyperion Theater having a smart aleck.
Absolutely. In fact, that's the other thing that there's a Deadpool walk around debuting in Avengers Campus this week, and it's just the whole notion of you understand this is an R-rated Marvel movie, and it's like, yep, and he's still out there in the campus. So
I would no, and not just in DCA, Jim. He's also even as far as Disneyland Paris. They have now a Logan or a walk around character for Deadpool. Now, again, they're French, so, that works. R-rated characters, who cares? Bring them out.
Okay.
Yeah, they're smoking a cigarette.
It works.
Baguette.
Yeah, cigarette, beret, it writes itself. But to that point, the Rogers the Musical was a prestige presentation production. It was new music, not tied directly to a movie property. It was just something that was kind of a really nice thing to have. But it was expensive. It was expensive.
Everything in that theater is expensive.
Everything's expensive. And, we're talking about a Disney company that's still a little bit, risk adverse. And Rogers was risk-y. And as a result, you don't see it right now. Now, that's not to say that you're going to leave a 2,000-seat theater there in that park empty forever. But as far as what comes into it, I don't know. And I kind of doubt you'll ever see the glory days of Aladdin, where you could throw that show in there and it ran for years and years and years.
That was one of the best stage shows Disney's ever done. Yeah. I mean, like that was a production. I mean, to your point about,
it was.
It's
it was.
theater,
and it was always fresh. And it was always fresh because, the genie's lines could change according to the year that he appeared in. He could always be contemporary and current, and he was always witty, something for everyone. But again,
the thing that gives me hope that we just talked about here is the fact that Disney is willing to employ a walk-around R-rated character in its parks, and I have been training for that role for the last 25 years.
Wow.
I may need to get in a little bit better shape to match Ryan Reynolds, but I think I can go in cold and read for that right now. Anyway,
Love that idea.
all right. Next email from John Forrest again for Jim and Jim. With Inside Out 2 taking over the top spot for animated films of all time, do we get the Wonders of Life Pavilion back in some way? So I did some research on this, and you guys see in the show notes, I ranked the top 10 animated films of all time. Inside Out 2 is number 1, and I gave 3 numbers here to consider. One is the unadjusted, not inflation adjusted box office number. And then I gave you the domestic U.S. box office, because Jim Shull, correct me if I'm wrong here, when Disney's thinking about domestic parks, it's thinking about domestic reception of those properties, right?
Yeah, that's the target audience.
And then I took that domestic box office and I adjusted it for inflation. So a film like Toy Story 3, which was released in 2010, made $415 million in 2010 dollars, is really $598 million in today's money. So in that case, the number 1 animated film of all time, in inflation adjusted, is Incredibles 2, which I would not have guessed at $758 million. Number 2 is Finding Dory, $633 million. Another film I would not have picked in the top 10.
Yep.
Number 3 is Inside Out 2, which is at $601 million right now. So is Jim Shull, or Jim Hill, since this is the second successful Inside Out film, they have a franchise now, right?
Yep. That in fact, that's the word coming out of Emeryville, is that the folks in Burbank have already raised their hand and said, Inside Out 3, please. Mind you, that's 4 and 5 years out, but there will be an Inside Out 3. But this is about what comes into the parks. And previously, we have heard a lot of noise about Inside Out coming in, but not necessarily as a component for Wonders of Life, but rather the Imagination Pavilion. I know that there were at least some very serious discussion about in the old 3D movie theater where Honey, I Shrunk the Audience and the like were located, Captain EO, that they were looking to do something there. What have you heard, Mr. Shull?
Well, Imagination is a really prime candidate for that, just for the reason you talked about, because the 3D theater is part of the Imagination Pavilion. I'll call it a campus, but it's separated from the other two. So in other words, you could do a inside out film, 3D film, 4D film, and put it into that location, into that theater, a lot sooner than you could do a completely redo of the Imagination ride. So sometimes the Disney company thinks in terms of, oh yeah, we love this. How can we get it next Tuesday? And at that point, when you put a schedule to it, it starts to force your hand about what you can do, not what you want to do, but what you can do.
Jim Shull, let me ask you this question. Is it conceivable, like would it even be possible, just from a discussion perspective, to have Figment and Inside Out characters in the Journey into Imagination ride? And the reason why I ask this is, Jim Hill points out all the time that Figment sells a lot of merchandise. You don't want to lose that character from the parks. Is there a way to cross the streams, as you will?
What was the name of the character? Her Riley's imaginary friend in Inside Out 1.
Bing Bong.
Bing Bong.
Bing Bong.
Bing Bong. So, if you put a gun to an Imagineer's head and I was in the room and they said, we want to see the streams merged, well, can Figment just be one of her imaginary friends? WDI, if you're listening, you can send the check too.
Yeah, you know what? That is not the worst idea I've heard this week. That's actually not bad. Like I could get behind that. I'd be okay with it.
But let me throw one quick thing in here that and again, every so often, you got to give credit where credit is due. Now, Pete Docter, who is a huge theme park fan, actually did put Figment in the first Inside Out movie. Okay. He's actually, you can see him in the Imagination Land part of the brain.
Linda, Jim has watched this film like it's the Zapruder Kennedy assassination film.
Yes.
Frame by frame.
Okay.
Go ahead.
All right. So my pal, Drew Taylor, who co-hosts on Fine Tuning, was up at Emeryville for the long lead press event for Inside Out 2 and mentioned to director Kelsey Mann to the effect of, well, Pete Docter put Figment into Inside Out 1. Are you going to do the same? And Kelsey sitting there with the producer of the film is like, well, no, it's too late. We've locked the movie, and geez, I wish we thought to do that. And so jump ahead 3 months. Drew is doing the just before the film gets launched press event. And, Kelsey's like, Drew. We thought about it, and we should get her to a place where we could put Figment in the movie. So they literally took his note and went back into the movie.
I'm saying Figment is canonically part of the movie.
There we go.
You know what? This is good enough for me.
Okay.
We have seen more tenuous connections played out in real life in the theme parks.
There we go.
All right, fair enough. We've got time for one more comment, and I'll go with this. It's from Dan Bidenstein about the new Country Bear Jamboree show that we talked about last week. And Dan says, Country Bear Jamboree was something I went to see on every visit. In my opinion, the old show was about the country bears singing songs, and the new show seems to be the songs sung about country bears. The emphasis now is on the songs, not the bears. I also want to mention that the song lyrics to Try Everything sounds like the anthem for drinking around the world.
That is great.
Honest to God, I wrote back to Dan, and I was like, dude, I thought I was smart, and then you dropped this on me at 8 a.m., so you are a better man than me.
I expect to hear that in the BGM and World Showcase during the Food and Wine Festival in Epcot. Try Everything.
There you go. Wow.
All right, folks, we're going to take a quick commercial break. When we come back, we go over the opening of Rock and Roller Coaster at Disney's Hollywood Studios on this day back in 1999. We'll be right back.
Hey, I don't know if you've noticed, but there's an election happening in a few months. Up here in New Hampshire, the campaign ads run 24/7 with each and every politician claiming that only they can fix the economy. Well, no disrespect to our elected officials down in Washington, D.C., but if it's all the same to you, I'd really like to be the one who's calling the shots when it comes to my personal finances. But here's the thing. Managing your money is hard. But the good news is you don't have to do it alone. Rocket Money, the money app that works for you, will help you save more, spend less, and take back control of your financial life. And Rocket Money does this because this personal finance app includes cool features like subscription management, which allows you to stay on top of all of your recurring subscriptions and bills. Rocket Money also features balance alerts, which means you'll get an alert when your checking account falls below a safe balance or your credit spend is a bit too high. I mean, wouldn't it be great if you never had to pay for an unwanted subscription again? Better yet, to have Rocket Money's concierge feature cancel those subscriptions for you so that you then wouldn't have to spend all that time on the phone with customer service. And what I love about Rocket Money is, well, I now have all of my accounts in one place, which means I can now see and understand my spending trends, which is a nice way to say I really need to cut back on the number of trips I make to Target on a weekly basis. But that's the beauty of Rocket Money's dashboard feature. It shows me how this month's spending compares to last month's spending. More to the point, Rocket Money will then help me create a custom budget, which will assist me in keeping my spending on track. By the way, I'm not the only one who's a fan of this personal finance app. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of 500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's features. So stop wasting money on things you don't use. Cancel your unwanted subscription by going to rocketmoney.com/DisneyDish. That's rocketmoney.com/DisneyDish. rocketmoney.com/DisneyDish. We thank them for sponsoring today's show.
And we're back. All right. Jim Hill, you want to take over this?
Well, again, it was 25 years ago today, and this show drops on July 29th, 2024. So again, we're talking July 29th, 1999, when there was an invitation-only party at Disney's Hollywood Studios. A rock and roller coaster starring Aerosmith would open to the public the next morning, July 30th, but tonight, tonight, a select few would get the chance to avail themselves to an all-you-can-eat buffet, not to mention an open bar. And I just want to pause here for a moment. It's a new thrill ride that with 3 inversions where you go from 0 to 57 miles an hour in 2.8 seconds. And again, you do those inversions, you pull 5 Gs. Does that sound like a good place to have a all-you-can-eat buffet?
An all-you-can-eat buffet in an open bar?
I'm just saying,
The janitorial crew probably had to have hazard pay that night.
There we go.
Wait, hold on. But this was a media event, Mr. Hill. I mean, as anyone who ever uses the word media as part of the name of his company, which you do, you know what goes on in a Disney-run media event. I mean, come on. The company wants everyone who comes to the event to have a really good time. And if it involves a little bit of imbibing and a churro or two, they're not going to argue with that. And, they give you swag and, all good stuff because they want good press. And this party, the one for Rock and Roller Coaster, the one on July the 29th, it was very special because it featured a live performance by the group Aerosmith. And they were out there in the courtyard right there in front of the entrance of the giant guitar Rock and Roller Coaster. And just for good measure, after the event was over, the concert was finished, they blew off the greatest truckload of fireworks I'd ever seen at Disney World. Not to mention the fact that they sent them all backstage, although a couple of shells did come dangerously close to my feet. But, beside that, it was all good.
And Jim Shull, if I recall correctly, when I say you helped design the ride, you not only designed the track layout for the coaster, but you were literally gluing things to the wall, the props to the wall, right, before the opening.
I was painting, I was gluing, I was basically the person they'd say, do this, and I did it. Or basically I'd grab the paintbrush out of the set designer's hand and say, I can do this faster. I know what I want here.
That's fantastic.
Right. At that point in time, sleep was highly overrated.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah, I can't imagine that Aerosmith being right next to you would not drive you to stay up late. All right, so I wasn't at this party, but Linda and I were in Walt Disney World as this whole thing was happening. So, Linda, you want to give the story of how we ended up in Walt Disney World during the opening of Rock and Roller Coaster?
Sure. So Len and I at the time were both working for a credit card company who
starts with A, sounds like American Express.
Sounds like American Express, yeah.
Everybody knows.
Okay. So we were both working at American Express, and I had the responsibility of planning a departmental team building event back when companies had money and spent them on things like trips to Disney World. And we were staying at the Boardwalk. That was our host hotel, which ended up being very nice. But we were there for a work function, happened to be the week of our birthday. So Len and I were celebrating with our families. We stayed at the Boardwalk in a very nice room.
So because Linda was planning the event, the Disney event coordinator upgraded her to concierge level.
Yes, it was lovely. Very nice perk there.
Yeah.
And everyone had talked about seeing Aerosmith in the hotel and kind of throughout the parks. But one morning, Len's wife at the time and I opened our door to go out into the hallway, and Steven Tyler was staying in the room across the hall and opened his door in his bathrobe.
I remember this. Oh my God.
All we did was go, ah! And he looked at us. Yeah, he looked at us. Steven Tyler looked at us and said, ah! And we laughed and commented on the fact that he had just a ridiculous amount of M&Ms on a room service tray right outside the room, and off we went. But
the funniest thing was so we do this, right? And honest to God, I couldn't help myself. But when Steven Tyler closed his door, I walked over and picked up the metal lid that was on his room service tray, just because I wanted to know what does a rock and roll icon eat for room service. And it was M&Ms, definitely, and it was basically like oatmeal, some bananas, and fruit for breakfast. It was the most common. There wasn't like a fifth of Jack Daniels or anything. It wasn't like 16 pizzas or whatever. He was eating the breakfast that you and I, any middle-aged man eats. If they want to be heart healthy or whatever. It's just the funniest thing. The other thing I remember is, Linda, you remember this? At the time, some of the band members had kids that were relatively young. I think Liv Tyler wasn't. I don't remember seeing her there, but the other band members had kids, and the kids would just run up and down the hallway. And I'm like, oh my god, they literally are just like us. Like I would run up and down the hallway too. Our kids would run up and down the hallway. Everyone's kids would run up and down the hallway. In the boardwalk concierge level, it was great.
Yeah, I mean, I had the opportunity and actually the privilege of hosting Joe and Steven's kids on Rock and Roller Coaster. And,
Really?
they're your typical, teens and preteens and small kids. If they were old enough to ride, they wanted to. And we rode over and over and over again. Now, I should mention that I was doing final editing. So I had worked the previous night and I rode that. Well, my top score was 32 times riding Rock and Roller Coaster without getting off.
Is that covered under the Disney Health Plan?
Wow.
I don't know. We'll see.
But, you get to the point where you're sitting there. I'm sitting there next to the audio engineer. Say, "Okay, do you want to go again? And we'll adjust the bass." No, I'm good. 30,
I'm good.
32,
I'm good.
and I'm out. I'm out.
When you were doing the media event, Jim Shull, I mean, I know like every opening of anything I've ever seen literally involves people doing things at the last minute. Were there any like last minute things for Rock and Roll?
Len, everything.
But like for the media event where you're like, no, don't stand over here. No, don't look at that. Was there anything like that?
Yeah, everything's a last minute, Len. I mean, when you were talking originally about checking out what Steven was eating, my experience was very much like what Hawkeye said to Black Widow. We remember Budapest very differently.
Right, yeah.
Because, while you're checking out his, what brand of M&Ms he's eating, I'm over there making sure that the tables are set up in areas. And when the media event presser is setting up the audio and they're taping wires down on freshly painted concrete, I'm having to stand and throw my body across that to say, no, you can't do that. Or, there are so many things that have to happen to do one of these major events, which we were going to do. And so my life was very much a blur for 72 hours.
Did you have to keep people from walking in wet concrete?
Oh, that and more. I mean, also
you knew it. You knew it was true. I've heard the stories.
or taking home souvenirs. You don't need that plaque. We took out one of the plaques at the very last minute, and it was sitting over the side. There are plaques in the plaza because we had to put in the fast pass machines, and as a result, we're about 3 plaques spares now suddenly. And surprisingly, we ended up with only losing one of the plaques. But one person we found as they were going out with the cart, having set up the tables and chairs, there was something very suspicious underneath the drape on their cart. And we, said, can we look at that, please? And no, you can't take the bronze plaque home as a souvenir. So put that back. We'll be with you. We'll be back with you shortly. And that's just one example of everything that happened that day. Plus the fact, again, we were bringing in a semi-truck loaded with not the Disney World concert gear, but the Aerosmith concert gear. And they had their own specifications, their own audio engineers, the people, their managers, and they wanted doing things the way they wanted it. So again, they had to power their equipment, which meant suddenly you had generators, unplanned for generators, I might add, there on the site. And again, it looked like Christmas. When you set up your Christmas tree and suddenly that beautiful living room is now just this tangled mass of extension cords. That's what Rock and Roller Coaster looked like.
So when you do a media event, there's like, I mean, obviously you've got the stages, you've got the lighting, you've got stuff like that, but you've also got decor, you've got trees, you've got flowers, you've got plants, right? So now you've got these roadies walking all over this stuff?
Oh, absolutely. Or even climbing inside the Rock and Roller Coaster icon guitar.
Sure. No
if
problem
you go to the back, there's a little hatch. And so they wanted to do some lighting effects. And so they would shove people into the back of the guitar. And and I'd walk over and tap on the fiberglass and say, you need anything?
You good? You good?
You were good? You live? And they would, they'd croak out something, and we'd hand them a water bottle, and they were good to go. But there was a lot of stuff like that, like, setting up all the fireworks on the roof, to make sure that the shells, unexploded shells, landed where they were supposed to. So, yeah, it was a joy.
When we were pre-gaming the show, Jim shared a story about, I mean, the rules are different when you're doing a media event. I mean, we were just talking about the trees and the shrubs and that sort of thing, that horticulture had come in months beforehand to plant. So, for example, you had to hide the view of Tower of Terror, but there were also the planters around there that had lovely flowers and that sort of thing that had now been trod on by all these roadies. Yeah. But well, Jim, explain what the media types did, the guys who were running the event, when they saw that happen, the call they made.
They would turn to me, smile sweetly, and say, "We'll get you new plants. We'll replace them. It's not that the trees are okay, the flowers are dead, but no worries. We've got a lot of plants backstage. We'll get you. We'll make you happy again."
So horticulture gets the call, and like Steven Tyler needs 3 ficuses right now. Okay.
Yeah. Well, but there
not
are
the
issues
strangest, not the strangest thing.
No, not the strangest thing. Because, for example, let me give you one example. If you remember Rock and Roller Coaster, and when the 3 of us were down there not too long ago, as you walk in through the gateway of G-Force Records, there's an upside down stretch Cadillac, and it's hanging overhead. And so we did due diligence on setting the height of the Cadillac so we would not impede any Walt Disney World truck making its nightly journey under that arch.
Oh, okay.
What we failed to consider is the fact that we never thought about roadies with their equipment and their trucks coming in.
To be fair, that's an edge case. Okay.
Yeah. So, I was walking in, about 4 a.m. in the morning, and looked down at my feet, and I found a mirror, a car mirror. And
you're like, this can't be good.
I pick up my car mirror. I pick up the car mirror, and I look up slowly. I pivot, I look up, and where there was a car mirror on the Cadillac, now that car mirror is in my hand. So, the point I'm making is you think about everything for park operation, but when you're doing a press media event, it's a whole different animal.
I love the idea that you did not consider the fact that Aerosmith might play at Rock and Roller Coaster starring Aerosmith, because you know that whoever did the next big project for Disney was like, well, what if there's a real Yeti on Expedition Everest? I'm just saying it's weird, but this might have happened anyway. All right, so Jim Shull, this all sounds very expensive. What with the rock stars and everything?
Oh yeah, I mean, you can't print money that fast. It's essentially drinking from the fire hose, because again, you remember that the reason this is all being done is to get the word out that Disney World has a major e-ticket, because Rock and Roller Coaster was a high-speed launch coaster with 3 inversions, and up until now, Disney World had not had a coaster that even did 1 inversion.
Right,
and inversions were the hot thing, and so suddenly, Disney World was hip, modern with it. They had a rock and roll legend band with a major thrill ride, and it was right next to Tower of Terror. So it was a 1-2 punch that Disney World wanted to drive home to all of the guests who are planning their next trip to Disney World. And so that's why money was not an object.
Yeah, this is before social media, so word of mouth was critical.
All right, but again, when we were talking earlier about this, Jim, you were mentioning how it's one thing to build an attraction, and again, you were 5 years on the job here. We're suddenly in this last 72 hours, you now have to pivot to selling Rock and Roller Coaster. Can you talk about that experience?
Oh yeah, it's not that I hadn't done an opening before, because I was involved with Mickey's Toontown when it opened at Disneyland. But working on a major launch of an e-ticket at Disney World is a whole nother animal, because everything, well, frankly, I had a group of people one day schedule a meeting. They showed up at my office there in the trailer, and they basically laid out the next 3 days of my life. And for example, I was to be met at my apartment there in Orlando at 4 a.m. And there was a very charming young
the day
woman.
After the party?
No, this was the day before the party.
Oh, okay.
Not for the party. We had to rehearse the party.
Oh, God.
So it's not enough to be woke up at 4 a.m. one day, but it was going to be 2 days. And, they said, okay, now we're going to walk you out here. These are your bullet points. You can say anything you want, Jim. but you have to say these things.
Yeah.
And here's your T-shirt, here's your hat. And again, as you said earlier on the show, this is before social media. So they were relying upon television stations, newspapers, radio stations, all to get their word out.
Oh, I can imagine. Yeah, like a classic rock station would be all over this, right? As number one, free trip to Walt Disney World, but number two, Aerosmith. So
Yeah, and it wasn't just the local market, although there was a lot of that. It even extended out to the West Coast and the Midwest. So
I remember going past these tables, and Linda, I think we were looking for, like, is there a Greensboro radio station here? Because we were living in North Carolina at the time, and I think there was, and we were like, oh my God, I know who this person is.
Rock 92, yep.
Rock 92, yeah.
Yep.
yeah, no, it was great because again, I had on the day of the event, I had my meter handler and they had my bullet points and I memorized those. And basically it's not that hard because once you're talked to the 6 radio station, it's basically all downhill from there. But I'll tell you this, they probably would have put me in a wheelchair and just rolled me down the table row if they could have to make it more efficient. But bottom line is, they gave me the 5 minutes, or they gave the reporter interviewer 5 minutes, and then at the end of the 5 minutes, the media handler would, give them the stink eye, tap their wrist, and then they'd say thank you very much, and we move on to the next table.
Yeah, so I mean, for people who've never done radio or TV spots live, that stuff is generally timed to plus or minus 1 minute of a schedule. Like you have a segment that runs from 9:35 to 9:37 or 9:38, and that's the window you have to hit. And so, but Jim Shull, I mean, I got to give you credit because from the perspective of someone being interviewed, you've got to be succinct, you've got to stay on point, right, and you've got to hit your marks so the other person can ask you all the questions they're supposed to ask you. And I'm telling you, that's hard.
It's hard, but you also develop a routine because usually the lead-in would be the traffic or weather report.
Yeah, and so
the interviewer would say, now let's talk about another issue of traffic. Speaking of traffic, here we are with Jim Shull, the executive creative director, Rock and Roller Coaster. Tell us about your new ride, Jim. And then I would segue into the bullet points.
Yeah, but you got on-the-job training like 35 times in a row.
Over and over and over again.
Yeah, most of us who do live stuff do not get the chance to do 35 takes.
There we go.
It was all great. But it was not just on radio. I also did television.
Well, now, toward that end, though, if you started at 6 a.m. and, again, did all of those radio stations up and down Sunset Boulevard, eventually you would have been there long enough that you could have done stuff for the West Coast. Did you do any?
Yeah, I did actually. Thanks for reminding me. Yeah. As my wife, Tracy, who saw me and reported back, she saw me on KBC, which is our local ABC flagship station in LA. Yeah. And they sent a reporter out to Orlando who interviewed me there in front of the guitar very, very early. I mean, literally, we're talking about dawn because it was the 7 a.m. broadcast here in Southern California where I'm talking to you from, and it was live TV. So once again, it was, speaking of traffic, let's get back to, let's talk about something near Walt Disney World. And I'm right here now with Jim Shull, who is executive creative director in Rock and Roller Coaster. Jim, tell us about it. And I would do my bullet point, and as the sun was rising slowly over the horizon of Orlando, Florida, I'd tell them all about it. And then again, the media advisor would tap on their wrist and then I'd be off because they'd go and do commercial break. But, after the fact, they sent me a tape. My wife looked at it and said, Jim, I love you, but you need to cut down on your coffee intake.
She's like, you're spending a little too much time with Steven Tyler.
There we go.
A little bit too much.
Too many M&Ms.
Linda, do you remember your first ride on Rock and Roller Coaster?
I sure do.
All right, so tell us what that was like as a guest, the person who Jim Shull here is trying to impress.
So I'm going to tell you about my first ride and my most memorable ride. But my first ride, I remember thinking that whoever picked Aerosmith must have never seen Aerosmith before, because in my mind, it was the anti-Disney, right? Like, do you know who these people are and what they do on stage? So in my mind, it was like completely rebellious, definitely of the era Len and I grew up in. So the music was really relevant. So in my mind, it was like, heck yeah, here we go, right? The first
and to do it for a thrill ride, right? To do it for a thrill ride.
Yeah. But the ride itself was phenomenal. The loud music, the choice of songs, the 3 inversions, the speed, the colors, all of it was just mind blowing. And it's a fast ride. You're in and out relatively quickly, but I remember leaving thinking, oh my God, that was awesome. Like I could feel, I think I had trouble walking up the ramp as you come out, as you come off of the ride, just from like the adrenaline of having been on it. So, and it was, I think we immediately got in line again, right, to do that.
Yeah. So, Jim Shull, speaking of the line, would you like to tell my sister what the inspiration for that line design was?
Well, Linda, you pull from what you know, and in this case, the line. Well, we needed a shade cover, and so where else would you pull a shade cover from except from something I knew, which in this case was my elementary school cafeteria. So that whole area is actually designed after the shade structure for the cafeteria at Dixie Canyon Elementary.
Now you know, Linda.
I think he just made it weird.
There.
He made it weird.
I know. It's like, macaroni and cheese was my favorite. You can't go wrong with that.
Okay, now speaking of making it weird, Jim, can you now tell the story about, again, you're there at the press event, you're doing all of this stuff. Can you talk about the moment when you suddenly realize, oh, they've opened this up to the public?
Oh, climate change is real because I can tell you, for example, I was standing that day and I was doing some press event with a newspaper reporter, and they hadn't yet let guests in, but they were about to, because I was facing away from the gate, and suddenly I felt this wave of hot air. The kind of air that when you're doing your Thanksgiving turkey and you open up your stove oven door and suddenly you get that, you lose your eyebrows. It's that kind of wave of heat, because suddenly there's this trampling horde of humanity all making a beeline for the entrance of Rock and Roller Coaster. And it was purely that wave of heat I felt as they were coming in. At that moment, I realized, oh, we're open.
Wow. That's fantastic. So, Jim, if they open Rock and Roller Coaster, I'm sure there are still things that have to be done for the ride. Glue needs to dry, stuff needs to be put up. What happens then?
Plants need to be replanted, things like that. Yeah, we call it the punch list, because what you do in a case like this is you have the opening and you get everything done in order to open. That doesn't mean it's done. It means it's done enough to open. So we have what's called a punch list of things that still need to be done, and that list is page after page after page of things that are done until everything was crossed off my list. I couldn't go home. Eventually, after about 6 weeks, I did do it. Now, one problem with this is once that ride is open, I don't have free access anymore. I can't come into that building any single time I do, because then in that case, I get stink eye from the very cheerful ride operators who say, why are you here? We have a ride to run. Get out. And so I would start coming in at third shift. Now, basically, that's a 10 p.m., starts at 10 p.m., and I had to be out by 5 every single day.
But Jim Shull, wasn't FastPass rolling out like the same year as this? Like, when did FastPass come out? 97, 98?
Well, the wound is
Therapy's
almost
going well.
healed
Thanks for
from
asking.
that, Len, but it's like, if I start twitching, I blame you. But look, FastPass was something that was championed by Disney World, the executive who was in charge of the Disney MGM Studios, and it was a really good idea. Who wouldn't want to have a reservation to their favorite ride? That was a concept behind FastPass. Now, Disney did not plan FastPass to be installed for the opening of Rock and Roller Coaster because it hadn't been invented yet, even on a gleam of an idea. However, when we are now 6 weeks out from the opening, we get a call.
6 weeks.
Project management walks into my office and says, that thing we've been talking about that's been rumored? Yes. Tell me about it. Well, we're going to do that. And so that's where those 3 plaques came from, because they were in the concrete and they had to come out of the concrete, because suddenly we had to design and install FastPass machines. And luckily, there's a little bit of concrete back toward the wall, the little area that went to the former backstage area where I think it's the Cars attraction theater is now today. And we just simply had to lay conduit. And then the question came up from the construction manager, how big a piece of conduit can you put in? Because we literally had no idea how large
how many cables,
or how many conduit wires We had, how many cables do you want?
How
We
how
have
many
no
cables
idea.
is it going to take to run this electronic device that we've never installed before? Yeah, I
No,
don't know.
or even design. No, we
Lots.
had no idea. So, big condom is your
One
answer. How much do you have? Put it in.
One of the great things that when we were working on the Rock and Roller Coaster episode of Disney Impact was not only to get to ride the ride with you, but and hear the stories about how it came together, but like all the little things that guests kind of like walk past on the way to the ride, but actually took some effort to get in. Like there's an actual real autographed poster of Aerosmith in the exit of the gift shop, but it didn't get there until like a year after the ride, right?
No, it was late because there were a lot of approvals, and we wanted to get their pose just so. But no, it actually, that's a great example. The very last item on the punch list was that poster, and it was probably right in the middle. But when you do everything else, you're left with that. And it took time. It did take time, but I'm very proud of having done it because it does put the cherry on the sundae for a Rock and Roller Coaster because you get to see it as you exit the ride.
Linda, what is your most memorable ride on Rock and Roller Coaster? I think I know the thing you're going to say, but go ahead.
So, Jim Shull, I'm not sure you probably hear from guests all the time about how wonderful the things are that you do, but this is actually a core memory for me as a parent.
Core memory. Nice call back to Inside Out too. Go ahead. Go.
So my youngest daughter, Morgan, was a little bit of a grump as a child, and I'm being kind. You didn't make this child mad, right?
No.
And up until that point, the only roller coaster she had ridden was Big Thunder Mountain, and not even in the same family, right, as Rock and Roller Coaster. But we finally convinced her to go on Rock and Roller Coaster. I get her on the ride. And then I remember that when the harness comes down, I can't see her, right? Your head can only turn so far, and I can't touch her really. So she's on her own for the 2 minutes, whatever the ride is, right? And all I can do is hope at the end of it, she's still speaking to me. So we get on the ride. She's nervous. I hit my panic moment as a parent, and off we go. And I'm screaming, the music's loud. I can't hear anything. We get to that, the stretch where you get out of the car, and I look at Morgan, and she says, "That was awesome," and loved it.
It was the happiest I've ever seen that child.
It's true.
Not exaggerating.
She loved it, and we went on it again and again. But that was sort of the start of Morgan's life of adventure, really. But that's one of those core memories I have of getting her to face her fears, and she did this really cool thing, and we got to do it together. And still think about it every time I ride that ride.
Like when you tell that story, I know exactly where I was in the gift shop when she said that was awesome. Like I was right in front of the TVs that are playing like the Jim Shull, is that a real or a fake Aerosmith concert?
That's one that we filmed. So yeah, it's a real fake. It's a real fake one, but
it's a real fake. They were really singing, yeah. But that I remember where I was when she said that. That's how funny that was.
But Linda, that is so awesome because one of the things about that thrill ride is it really is aspirational. A lot of kids and even adults who are maybe not exactly thrilled to get on a ride like that one come off of it and they're really, really happy. And part of it is because when I was working with Dan Granberg, who's a ride engineer, we set as a goal that, I said, I don't care what this thing does, but I have to wear my glasses because I wear glasses, and a lot of major thrill rides, they make you take everything out of your pockets and your glasses off before you can ride. And I said, I don't care what this does, but one of the criteria is you have to make this so glass smooth that I can wear my glasses. So that's very gratifying to hear, Morgan's comment. Thank you for sharing.
Oh, you're welcome. I think it also connected our kids to our music.
Even better.
It's true.
Even better. One final question here, Mr. Shull. We're celebrating the 25th anniversary of the launch of this coaster, but just earlier this year, we had Rock and Roller Coaster shut down for a 6-month-long rehab. And and again, I understand you haven't worked for the company for a couple of years now, so you obviously wouldn't have any insights about specifics of that sort of thing. But when you have a 25-year-old coaster and it goes down for 6 months or thereabouts, what typically are you doing?
Well, after I retired from Disney, it doesn't mean I'm gone from Disney, and I still have people and friends we talk to, we go out to lunch, etc. But one of the things you have to think about is, let's use the term duty cycle. Well, a typical roller coaster will work only during the season, high season. Usually it's spring to fall, then it shuts down, and they maintain it during the 6 months of the year that it's not operational because the park's not open. That's not the case at Disney World. That thing is going to be operating 24/7 if they could get it, but it'll operate year round.
Yeah,
with
12 hours a day,
12 hours
7
a
days
day.
week, 3 days,
And so you have a ride that a vendor will sell you and say, well, this is good for 20 years. Disney World will do the 20 years in half the time. So it's not it's not odd that periodically Rock and Roller Coaster, Thunder, Space Mountain, or any of the other rides are going to go down for extended periods of rehab because they have extensive duty cycle years laid upon them by the park. I know that's really a boring explanation, but
that's fantastic. And Jim, because you're still an insider, I'm not going to ask you what band is going to follow Aerosmith. But Linda, you have no connections to the Disney company. What would you like to see for the band?
Well, personally, I would like a Van Halen ride, but that's just me.
This is why we're twins, right? Some stuff is genetic. Go ahead.
No, and if not, I mean, who doesn't know a Journey song?
True.
Oh, that'd be amazing too. Yeah. Also, very popular.
I mean, what are you going to go with One Direction? I mean, there's nowadays not much to pick from.
That's true. All right, folks. Well, thank you guys for coming on the show. By the way, if you want to learn more about Rock and Roller Coaster starring Aerosmith, we did a whole show about the development of this thrill ride over on Disney Unpacked. And I want to say that was episode 6 of season 1 of our new video series on Patreon. And that's going to do it for the show today. You can help support our show by subscribing over at patreon.com/JimHillMedia, where we're posting exclusive shows every week. Our most recent show with Brian Goggin asks if Disney Plus's Star Wars show, The Acolyte, maybe could have been a little less dark. Check it out at patreon.com/JimHillMedia. On next week's show, we've got so many comments about Frontierland that we're going to do a deep dive into the history and possible future of this OG Disney theme park land. You can find more of Jim at jimhillmedia.com and more of me, Len, at touringplans.com. Jim Shull, thanks again for being on the show. What's occupying your time and keeping you out of trouble these days?
Well, in my spare time, I now have a new channel over on YouTube, and its name is Disney Journey with Jim Shull. On Disney Journey, I share personal stories after my 3 decades plus of being a Disney Imagineer with the history of Disney rides, Disney shows, and Disney attractions. Like the recent episode where I explored the rumor that the People Mover is returning to Disneyland. So go and check out my YouTube channel, Disney Journey with Jim Shull.
Fantastic. And Linda, thanks again for being on the show. Your first time on the show. Do you want anyone to find you? And if so, how?
On all my socials, it's just Linda Malone, but you don't need to follow me. I'm not nearly as interesting as the rest of the Testa family.
I don't know about that. You're kind of the leader of all of us. So thank you for being on the show. And we're produced spectacularly by Eric Hersey, who'll be serving Tio Hersey's queso, chili, lime, and cane sugar kernels at the 2024 Beaver Creek Popcorn Festival. That's September 7th and 8th, 2024 on Dayton Xenia Road between North Fairfield Road and Meadowbridge Drive. I'd park at Main Elementary and walk. It's free, and the fresh air would do you good. In beautiful downtown Beaver Creek, Ohio. While Eric's doing that, please go into iTunes and rate our show and tell us what you'd like to hear next. For Jim and Linda, this is Len. We'll see you on the next show.